I've never opposed vaccines. What I've said is that we should have good science, we should have robust science, and that we should end the financial entanglements between the regulatory agencies and the pharmaceutical companies. But if people want to take vaccines, they ought to be able to do that, like they should be able to take any other kind of medicine. I've never opposed that. That is a defamation.
I am a Democrat, and I kind of cringe when Pedro said, he introduced you as the Democratic, presidential campaign, and I really need to know from you what makes you feel like you are a Democrat. What makes you? Is it like the only way I can win is if I claim to be a Democrat? You just lumped yourself with Bernie Sanders. I get it. I just wish. I wish we had that third party. I wish that you could, feel confident that you're strong enough in your campaign and your beliefs that you could run on an independent, because that is what you are. You are definitely not, in my book or any of my Democratic family or friends' book, a Democrat. Your conspiracy theories, they literally scare us. We just came out of 4 years of, full of Trump's lies and his conspiracy theories. In this country, you claim that you want to heal us as a nation and our divide. And this is not. I mean, the Wi-Fi causes cancer, and 5G is mass surveillance, and chemicals in our water cause transgender, and antidepressants cause school shootings. I'm so confused, and so I'm looking for clarity from you today, Mr. Kennedy.
Okay, Sharon, thank you for the call. You laid out a lot of things. We'll let Mr. Kennedy respond.
Yeah, Sharon, thanks for those questions. If you go down the checklist of all the things that my father believed in, that Robert Kennedy and my uncle John Kennedy believed in, I would check every one of those boxes. Of classic progressive, liberal, Democratic candidates. I don't think you can point to one of those things that I'm not fighting for, and that I've fought for my whole life. I mean, I've been arguably the lead environmental lawyer in this country and advocate in this country. I founded the biggest water protection group in the country. I've devoted my life to protecting the environment, to protecting civil rights, to protecting the right to choose bodily autonomy, to challenging the emergence of the military-industrial complex, and the warfare state, which has been a classic concern of the Democratic Party and Democratic leadership, to challenge the dominance of Wall Street and the large and corporatism that has now taken over both political parties and our country. So those are the issues, and to also champion the cause of the working poor in this country, of the middle class, and I'm the only Democrat who's really talking about those issues and has concrete policies for re-establishing the American middle class and the industrial base in this country. You say that I have conspiracy theories, and you labeling me anti-vax, which I'm not, or a conspiracy theorist, which I am not, is one of the ways that the Democratic Party and their allied press have silenced me. I mean, you mention, for example, 5G and dismiss the fact that 5G causes cancer, but I'm representing now hundreds of men and women in this country who have gotten glioblastoma, classic cell phone tumors, from 5G, and there are reams of scientific studies that show that is happening. You say that 5G is not used for surveillance. Is there really any American left who believes that the government is not spying on the American people? Edward Snowden demonstrated this. I don't think you'll find a single member of Congress who, if you ask them, does the government spy on Americans, will tell you no. So I don't understand how that's a conspiracy theory. I've never said that atrazine causes transgenderism. I've never said that. What I've said is that atrazine and this is very well documented, and anybody can look up these studies, that atrazine, when it is added to water in which frogs, in laboratories in which there are male frogs. In fact, one of the studies, they took 27 male frogs, exposed them to atrazine. 90% of them were sterilized, and 10% of the frogs became female and were able to produce fertile eggs. So it has that capacity. It's an endocrine disruptor, which, I've been fighting endocrine disruptors my whole life, and I don't think there's any scientific controversy that they affect sexual development. PCBs, glyphosate, many others. It's very, very well documented. And I've said we should look at the chemical exposures to see what their impact is on public health, on depression, on endocrine disruptors, on the alteration. For example, why are girls in this country demonstrably reaching puberty at much younger ages than they were a generation ago? Those are things that we should be looking at. And that's all I've said, and I don't think I think that's common sense. I don't think you'd say that that's a conspiracy theory. It's science-based.
So, Mr. Kennedy, when you say it's science-based, then exactly what science are you basing it on, and have you put that proof out there on your website or wherever your campaign is that information out there so people can look at it for themselves?
Yeah, of course I have. These scientific studies are listed on my website, and they're available to anybody. In fact, just go to Google and type in frogs exposed to atrazine and fertility, and you'll see the scientific study, peer-reviewed science. This isn't something that's obscure or hidden. Anybody can look these studies up, and it's not rocket science. But there are literally thousands and thousands of studies that talk about endocrine disruptors and warn. In fact, plastics and BPA in plastics is an endocrine disruptor.
Okay.
So we're exposed to these all the time. There are alterations that are happening in sexual development in young Americans. I don't think anybody disputes that, and the science is out there. I mean, one of the great scientists on this is Dr. David Carpenter, and you can look up his studies and go track his interviews. But this isn't a theory. This is something that's peer-reviewed and very well known and well established.
And people can check out the website. We've put it up that people can see.
How is it that you expect people to believe you when you provide all types of disinformation? Let me give you one example that I don't believe can be refuted by a constant filibuster that you keep relying on to answer questions. You appeared at the Louisiana State Legislature. You may recall that you claimed that the vaccine, the COVID vaccines that is, were killing people. And you used the data from VAERS, the unvetted data that had not been vetted for its authenticity as to which people had died from COVID or which people died with COVID. And you cited that as evidence for the vaccine killing people. And this has fueled vaccine hesitancy and responsible for countless deaths amongst the people who overwhelmingly die from COVID who are unvaccinated. This is absolutely unacceptable to the American people. You talked about feudalism. This is Byzantine. This is science denial. There are other instances. For example,
let's keep it to that one only because of our time and we have other callers. So, Mr. Kennedy, go ahead and you can respond.
Yeah, so, you raise an interesting issue, which is the VAERS system reliable? And VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, it's the system, the primary system, and today the only system that is used by CDC to test vaccine safety, the system is not a good system, and people have known that for many, many years. But it's the only system, and in fact, the reason that it's a poor system is that it relies on voluntary reporting. And so you need a doctor. If you, for example, receive the vaccine, you die 17 days later, and your doctor then needs to report that to VAERS and say this was a potential vaccine death. Most doctors aren't going to do that because they don't see the connection, and that kind of system doesn't work. You need a machine counting system that actually can do a cluster analysis, and that is, it does not rely on voluntary human reporting, which is biased. Nevertheless, VAERS reports there have been more reports of deaths and injuries from VAERS than all vaccines combined since 1986. So it is, by the only measure that CDC has, that it uses, it is the most dangerous vaccine and has killed more people than any other vaccine in history. I want to say this, that this system has been criticized for many, many years. And in 2010, including David Kessler, who was a former attorney general or a surgeon general, who said, this system undercounts vaccine injuries by orders of magnitude. So CDC retained a Harvard and a group of scientists at Harvard to develop a new system, a machine counting system that would collect all of the vaccine injuries and do it accurately. In 2010, it was led by a team of scientists. The team of scientists was led by a scientist called Lazarus, and they developed a system that worked very well. They tried it out on the one HMO, which is called the Harvard Pilgrim, and they were going to unroll it. If it worked at Harvard Pilgrim, which it did, they were supposed to unroll it to all of the HMO data. But what happened is they came back and they said, this works. And what we're finding is when we compare it to the old system, that the old system is actually collecting less than 1% of vaccine injuries.
Okay.
So anybody can look this study up. It's called the Lazarus study. They developed a system. They said CDC was telling people at that time that the vaccines were injuring 1 in a million people. What Lazarus found was that 2.7, about 1 in every 36 people were getting injured. So it's a horrendous injury rate. They reported that to CDC, and CDC then went silent. And that, the description of that interaction, the CDC, when it saw this huge magnitude of vaccine injury, shut down the system and refused to unroll it and refused to talk to the very scientists that they had retained.
Okay.
So now that during COVID, I just want to say this, during COVID, they developed another system called vSafe, which was confirming this horrendous rate of injury. And about 2 weeks ago, when they started to unroll the new vaccine, the new boosters, CDC mysteriously shut down the vSafe system. So, you shouldn't really come to me. It's unfair, I think, to come to me and say that I've cited VAERS, which is a bad system, admittedly, but it's not bad because it overcounts vaccine injuries. It's bad because it undercounts them by 100-fold. Okay. And that's CDC's own peer-reviewed studies that show that. And the question you should really be asking is, why doesn't CDC have a system that works? I've never opposed vaccines. What I've said is that we should have good science. We should have robust science, and that we should end the financial entanglements between the regulatory agencies and the pharmaceutical companies. But if people want to take vaccines, they ought to be able to do that, like they should be able to take any other kind of medicine. I've never opposed that. That is a defamation that's applied to me erroneously by vested interests, including the pharmaceutical industry and the mainstream media that is dependent on pharmaceutical revenues, to make me look, to discredit me, to marginalize me, to vilify me, make me look crazy. I've never I've never been anti-vax. What I've said to people is you ought to be able to make up your own mind about any medicine that you take, and that you should, and that we should have the best science possible. We should have the same kind of scientific studies, placebo-controlled studies, prior to licensure that we have for every other medicine. Why are vaccines exempt from that? They shouldn't be. We should have the good studies.